Welcome back, everyone, to another week of distance learning. Hopefully, you guys did okay last week. I got everyone's quizzes, so that's good. I double checked. I haven't had a chance to grade them yet. That might change before this video goes up. But if you have not received a grade from the quiz last week, that's fine. I'm still in the process of trying to get caught up on grading. I've got everything physically graded. I just haven't had a chance to upload them yet. As you can imagine, the setup for distance learning and trying to get everything shifted over has taken quite a bit of time. And on top of that, I've got some other things with everything that's going on right now. So I'll do my best. I'm trying to get caught up, but once I get caught up, it should be a little bit easier to stay on top of it from now on, now that everything's online. But if you have any questions, just let me know. But anyway, now that we're done with the drug and alcohol unit, since we had to cut that a little bit short due to time, we're going to focus on basically what's going to carry over until the end of the year. Well, there'll be some small differences throughout, but the major overarching theme for the rest of the year is going to be our sexual health and wellness unit. So let me know if you have any questions, especially now that we're not in a classroom setting. I think it might be easier to ask some questions about these things as long as they're appropriate. But either way, so what we're going to start with is we're going to start with STDs and disease prevention, stuff like that. I'm going to integrate in, normally I say this until later, but considering we don't have as much time, I'm going to integrate in a little bit of anatomy and just reproductive terminology, talking about the parts involved and making sure you're aware of what parts we're discussing. Because again, normally I would wait until a little bit later when it's a little bit more relevant, or I mean, it's still relevant here, but like when we could spend more time on it. But since we don't have that much time left, I'm going to kind of integrate it here so we can get that out of the way. So we're going to talk about the diseases, we're going to talk about the anatomy of it and sexual well-being. We'll talk about contraception once we get through the disease portion of it, talking about how to prevent pregnancy and also how to prevent STDs as well. And then to wrap up, probably based on how much time we have left, I think we'll still have enough time for everything that I'm going to discuss today, but we'll see how it turns out in the end. But at the very end, we'll talk about pregnancy, child development, all that stuff, fetal development, and like fetal health, making sure the baby develops appropriately. That usually doesn't take too much time to cover, and I'm going to save that until right at the end if we've got time for it, so within the last couple days. But either way, so we'll go ahead and get started today. So my plan for this week is I'll cover STDs today. I'm sure that a lot of you are already aware of what these are and the common examples that I'm going to go through today. And then tomorrow I'll get into some of the anatomy and just some vocabulary, just some terminology so you guys know what I'm talking about moving forward. And then we'll look at a couple specific examples, obviously the big ones like HIV, HPV we'll look at. There's normally a movie that I show, but obviously I can't do that now, so I'll try to find a workaround, but either way. So anyway, STDs. You all know what STDs are. You've heard them before, and you probably know of most of the common ones at least. But it's still important to discuss and to discuss ways to prevent them and also to identify symptoms and issues associated with them. STDs stand for sexually transmitted diseases, which I'm assuming you know. There's been a push lately. I've heard some people try to refer to them as STIs for sexually transmitted infections. I don't really hear this. I haven't heard this stick. Most people still call them STDs from my experience, and I still call them STDs. The reason behind this, I think, is weird. The rationale that I heard was that STI infection sounds better than disease, but to me, infection and disease have the same like connotation. So like I don't understand how saying someone has an STI is any better than saying they have an STD. I take that either way. If you tell me someone has an STI, I'm still gonna be like, okay. But either way. So transmission. STDs obviously, since they are sexually transmitted disease, they are diseases that are typically transmitted through sexual activity. There are exceptions, which we'll talk about. It's actually it's the third bullet point, but we'll get there. Sharing of bodily fluids through sexual activity, including semen, vaginal fluids, anything else exchanged during sexual contact, that kind of thing. Some parasites can contribute or can transmit sexually transmitted diseases or are themselves sexually transmitted. Crabs being the primary example, where if you don't know what crabs actually are, crabs are a species of lice. They're pubic lice. So just like the lice that you get on your head, I shouldn't have itched my head when I said that. Just like the lice that you get on your head, they're insects that feed on the blood of their hosts. So the main difference just being where they're located. So crabs are pubic lice found in the pubic region of humans, and I guess I haven't thought about other animals. Maybe other animals get it. But either way, drug abuse, I don't think we talked about this nearly as much as I normally do due to how the section got cut off. But if I didn't mention it before, I'm assuming you're aware, a lot of issues surrounding drug abuse, not just in terms of like what the drugs will actually do to you, but what else can happen comes from the spreading of disease, because when you are on certain drugs that require uh, needle injections, obviously when you're addicted to a chemical, you're not usually concerned about if the needle is sanitary or clean, or if you got it from a reputable place. Most of the time you're just concerned about getting high, so a lot of people will share needles, which is a very bad idea, because a lot of people that are addicted to drugs don't usually get themselves checked for venereal diseases. By the way, a venereal disease is the same thing as an STD, at least as far as I know. I might look up and edit in a little amendment if I'm wrong, but I'll double check towards the end. Um, and the last way is transmitted from mother to child during birth. This is why it's important that if a mother is aware that she has a sexually transmitted disease while she's pregnant, it's important to have that information shared with your doctor before childbirth, because that is when transmission can take place. I don't remember if it's in this PowerPoint, but I'll mention it just in case. From my understanding, that the incidence of passing a disease from mother to child is reduced significantly if the child is delivered via C-section, which is why it's important to have that information going in, because if you don't share that with your doctor, or if you don't know, and it's if the child is birthed naturally vaginally, then they're at a much higher risk of getting that disease that the mother carries on. I don't know what specifically reduces the risk, because you would think that through the placenta and through the umbilical cord that they're sharing so much bodily fluids that it wouldn't matter, but apparently something about the process of delivering a baby via C-section really cuts down on the infection rate. So here's what we're going to do today. Normally in the classroom setting, I would assign groups to tackle individual STDs, and then we would share out like we've done in the past, but obviously we can't do that right now, or we could try it, but it would be a lot more hassle. So instead what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go through the information that I've already compiled, and then instead of you having to research on your own, I'll post questions on the Google Forms just about each one, and just give me a general description of the disease. So basically what the questions are going to look like are, what is genital herpes, what are the symptoms, and is it curable? It'll basically be those three things. As you are probably well aware, some of these are curable or go away on their own. Some of them are permanent and will stay with you through life. I'll bring that up as we get to each one. We'll get there. And then just another last little thing I'll say at the end. We talked about this when we talked about just diseases in general, but there's different ways that you can, or different causes of these diseases. Some of them are viral infections, like herpes. Some of them are bacterial, like syphilis and gonorrhea. Some of them are fungal. Some of them are, again, like we said, parasites, or caused by parasites, those kinds of things. So we're going to go through that as we go through this PowerPoint here. So first one is genital herpes. Herpes viruses are a family of viruses that cause a lot of the symptoms that you would see in genital herpes: bumps and irritation on the skin, itchiness, redness, soreness. This is also associated with the chickenpox virus. The chickenpox virus is in the family, or is in the herpes virus family, which is why they have similar symptoms, but obviously with slight differentiations. So genital herpes is a herpes virus that affects the afflicted area. This can be on the genitals, the mouth, or anus, or just anywhere where they came into contact with the infected person. It is not curable if you contract genital herpes, at least currently. It is something that you will have for the rest of your life. However, it's not always present, which is often how this spreads, because you might not know that you're infected for a very long time. People with genital herpes tend to have what are called flare-ups, where the bumps and itchiness will arise every so often, usually in accordance with like stressful situations, usually is what I've been told. But I'm sure it can help, or it can happen whenever. And then they'll go away for a little bit and then come back up every so often. So it's not like you always have them present. It's just that the virus will always be in your body, and they will show up every so often. There are treatments you can take: antiviral medication, ointments and creams to relieve symptoms, those kinds of things. But it is something that will be with you for the rest of your life. Genital warts, and this is going to be related to HPV later on, so I'm going to skim through this real quick because I'm going to go into more detail about HPV. But basically, genital warts are caused by a virus, which I believe most warts are just in general. Obviously, again, on the genital region, which is what distinguishes them from regular warts. Usually caused by HPV, usually curable, usually easy to get rid of. They're just a minor thing. Again, as is the case with regular warts that you find on the rest of your body. You can have them treated. You can have them. I'm assuming you can have them like frozen and removed like you can with a regular wart, but either way. But again, usually these are the side effect of other infections, which we'll get to. HPV, this is a big one, which honestly, maybe I'm incorrect about assuming this, but I think this is one that a lot of people still don't really know a lot of. There's been a lot more push of awareness in the past couple of years, especially with the HPV vaccine that came on the market in the past. I was going to say a couple of years, but I think it's been almost a decade. But either way, HPV stands for human papillomavirus. It is an infection caused by a virus that is transmitted sexually, obviously. It can lead to a variety of different things. It can cause genital warts, like I just mentioned previously. Typically, most people don't exhibit symptoms, and it usually goes away on its own without people even knowing that they have it, which I think is a big reason why a lot of people don't usually pay attention to this one. However, the reason why it is important to be aware of is because in some cases, these have been linked to various types of cancers. In women, this has been linked to cervical cancer and ovarian cancer. And in men, it can be linked to certain types of prostate or penile cancer, testicular cancer. Again, not in every case. If you have HPV, that doesn't guarantee that you're going to get cancer at some point in your life, but it does put you at a higher risk for developing cancer, which is why it's so important. And also, again, like I mentioned, why there's now a vaccine that is on the market that you can now get. There's Gardasil, which some of you might actually have. They've been giving it up for several years now. When I was your age, it was still fairly new if it hadn't even come out yet, so I didn't get a chance to get the vaccine, but I know it's becoming more common to give people the vaccine now. But either way, again, like I said, normally I would show a movie on this. It's pretty good and it's very interesting. It follows the lives of 5 different women that this affected, and it's really interesting to see into, but obviously I can't show that now because we're not in a classroom setting, and I'm pretty sure that would be illegal because I paid for it, and I can't distribute that movie to several different people without them paying for it, so we'll find a workaround. I'm going to go through gonorrhea, chlamydia, and syphilis kind of all in one because they're very similar. The main difference between them is just what bacteria causes the infection, but a lot of them have similar symptoms. These 3 are bacterial infections, as I just previously stated, that can cause a lot of the same symptoms, that being itchiness, redness, irritation on the skin, what they call genital discharge, which is basically anything that's coming out of you that is not supposed to be coming out of you, like anything that's not urine or feces or anything that would normally be excreted from your body, like pus, and I don't want to get too gross, but you get the idea. Things that are coming out of you that are not normal. These are treatable with antibiotics because they are bacterial infections. So this is you just get prescribed an antibiotic, and normally it would clear up within a couple weeks as long as the medication is effective. But again, if you look at these 3 things, you can pause the video and go through them individually, or Google them on your own if you want. But I'm going to skim through them very quickly because they're very, very similar. Just main differences being what type of bacteria causes them. They get their names from the bacterial infection, or the bacteria that causes the infection. So that's why they're different. Crabs I already mentioned, so I'll kind of skim through it. But these are a variation of lice. They are pubic lice that feed on the host around the pubic region. I always forget, and I need to double check this. I feel like I've looked this up before, and I think this is true, but I don't want to spread misinformation or myths. I think you can get these from non-sexual contact from like infected surfaces. A lot of times people will talk about this in terms of like public restrooms and like public toilets, where you can get them from toilet seats. I think that's true. It sounds like something that someone could make up, but I think I've looked it up, and I think that is true. Maybe I'll add like a note or something here if you want to Google it on your own, but we'll see. But either way. Big one, and this might be the last one. Yeah, I saved the biggest one for last. HIV and AIDS. You all know what HIV and AIDS are. It's one of the biggest ones that everyone talks about, and for a good reason. HIV and AIDS are related. They're not the same thing, and I'll explain what that is if there's a misconception there. HIV is the actual virus that causes the disease, obviously, but AIDS is a description of the symptoms caused by the HIV virus, if that makes sense. So, HIV stands for Human Immunodeficiency Virus. What that essentially means, immunodeficient. If your immune system is deficient, you are unable to fight off certain infections and diseases because your immune system is compromised. The white blood cells in your body that normally fight off infections are attacked by this virus directly. A lot of viruses target specific types of cells, and the HIV virus attacks white blood cells, so it is destroying your body's natural defenses, so it can no longer fight off infections. That being said, that is what eventually leads to the development of AIDS. So again, AIDS is a descriptor. It describes the symptoms of the HIV infection. So you can be HIV positive and you can have HIV but you might not necessarily have AIDS yet. You will most likely develop AIDS as a result of the HIV virus, but it is not something that happens at the same time. AIDS stands for auto or acquired immunodeficiency syndrome, and again, it's basically described by a very low T cell count or a very low white blood cell count. Again, you do not have AIDS technically until you reach a certain threshold where your body does not have a certain amount of white blood cells or T cells or natural immune cells in your body. So again, you can have HIV, you can be HIV positive, but if it's early on in the infection, you will probably still have a good T cell count, you'll probably still have a good white blood cell count. But as that infection persists, eventually your white blood cell count will go down, and when it gets to a certain threshold, you will be considered to have AIDS. You will be considered to have this syndrome. Currently no cure, but over the years it has gotten much more treatable. For a very long time, this was a death sentence. There are a lot of famous people that have succumbed to this. Freddie Mercury is a big one. Freddie Mercury died of HIV and AIDS. Eazy-E got HIV and AIDS. I'm trying to think of other ones. Those are the two biggest ones that come to mind. Not ones that have died. Those are the two biggest ones that have died. Magic Johnson has HIV. He's had it for a very long time, but he's still alive and actually doing surprisingly well for how long he's had it. Charlie Sheen was diagnosed a couple years ago. I feel like there are other people I'm forgetting. But either way. One other thing that I was going to mention is that most of the time, people with HIV, the thing that actually causes you to get sick, because in itself, HIV does not really cause many symptoms, because again, it's only attacking your white blood cells. So most of the time when people get sick, it is the result of HIV, but it is usually a different infection because your body can no longer fight the infection. So most of the time when people die of HIV or AIDS, it's because they have some other type of infection, whether it be like pneumonia or tuberculosis or something like that, but they are susceptible to that virus, and that virus becomes so much worse because of the HIV and the AIDS. So it's kind of a hand-in-hand kind of thing. But anyway, we'll spend more time on this. Again, this is one of the bigger ones, so we take more time to look at this one individually. There's a couple very famous cases, like I mentioned, and there's one that comes out of Indiana that you might have already heard of that we're going to focus on probably next week. But we'll see when we get there. So, again, for today, I'm just going to ask for some brief descriptions of each of these diseases to make sure that you watch through the video, or at the very least Google these diseases on your own. If you do look these up, disclaimer, and I'll probably put this at the beginning of the video too, just be aware you probably will get pictures with some of them, and some of the pictures are gross, so discretion advised, and I would probably advise against looking them up on your own. It'd probably just be safer to look through the video. But you've been warned, and you might come across something you don't want to see if you choose to not heed my advice. So either way, tomorrow we'll go through some of the vocab. I'll post some notes and ask some more questions, and we'll continue with this conversation as we move forward. So thanks, guys. I'll see you tomorrow.